This is the Observations Podcast for Sunday, the 1st of September, 2024. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Dale Franks.
Michael Wade.
And I have a brief note before we actually get into the meat of the podcast. You may...
Critter news.
You may, at various times, hear some very repetitive, very high-pitched squeaking, because we have a new addition to the household today. Meet Rocky. Rocky
Aww.
is a 6-month-old black dog. And we don't know anything else about Rocky than that, other than he is a bit of a goof. And he also doesn't know how to sleep. So
It looks like he sleeps fine.
or he sleeps like he pays the bills around here, one of the two. As you may remember, in a previous podcast, we talked about how we had lost the last of our dogs. He was 14 years, 8 months old. It was a little tough. And this week, I've been on vacation all week. So on Tuesday, I went down to look at a little pitty puppy at the San Diego Humane Society. Instead, I ran into this guy and pretty much fell in love with him and brought him home. So he's been here for, this is his 5th day now that he's here. He's a great dog. He's very confident. In most situations, we ran into a little lack of confidence of trying to get him outside into the car today. I say this because, A, it's put me in a far better mood having little Rocky around. But Rocky has a Kong toy, which is a squeak toy that he holds up high in the air with his head all the way back and then just bites it to make it go squeak, 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 squeak. So if you hear that, that's why. It's him being goofy playing with his Kong toy. Let me just say, just as a public service announcement, although I don't get paid for this, obviously, but I would suggest if you are needing a dog or looking for a dog that you do take a trip down to your local Humane Society, especially if they're a local kill shelter, to try to save a dog's life. In this case, I got Rocky for free. They just gave me a dog. I literally showed up and they gave me a dog for free. And of course, I'm a veteran, so I get one free adoption per year, apparently, which is something I will, keep in mind for future reference. But shelters are so overcrowded right now. And the Humane Society is generally a non-kill shelter, but many cities have their own shelters that they run that are not part of the Humane Society. Those do tend to be kill shelters. Shelters are massively overloaded with pets right now, dogs, cats, chinchillas, whatever. And so much so that they're begging for foster families who will just foster the dog because there's literally no room in the shelters. So if you're looking for a dog, a shelter dog is a great option. And we got this little 6-month-old bundle of joy, and we're looking forward to spending a
And do
lot of
the
time
shelters provide the shots and all that stuff?
Oh, yes. He is up on everything except for his DPPAV, which is due this week as he hits 6 months old.
Right.
Actually, it was
gotta
due.
be old enough.
Yeah, actually, it was due yesterday. So I'll be taking him to the vet this week, obviously to establish care. You get the full medical records for the dog. They're generally spayed and neutered already. They are generally microchipped, and they register you with the microchip.
Oh, they've got the RFID ID?
Yeah, so he is chipped, spayed, or neutered, actually, in his case. And he's fully up to date on his health care and stuff like that. In fact, they gave me a free, one of those little chewable flea things that work for 30 days. They gave me a free one of those, which I gave him today. So he'll be good through the end of September, which basically means good until next spring, late spring. So I would just urge you, adopt rather than looking at
That's a great deal. I mean, just even if you get a purebred, I mean, you've got to pay for all the shots and the immunizations and all that stuff. So
Yeah,
on top of paying for the dog.
Yeah, so free dog and free microchip, spaying, neutering, and everything else. So he's just got to go to my vet this week so that we can establish care for him. They give you all of the medical records. You also get a certificate for a free initial exam to establish care at your vet so that you can get that first exam for free as well. So you're saving a dog, especially at like a city shelter. Government shelters are generally kill shelters. And
Right.
And look, I almost went up to Moreno Valley to look at a boxer mix that they had up there. It's about 2 hours away because it is a kill shelter. And their adoption fees are only $85. So even if you have to pay full price, $85 is a pretty cheap price for...
That's nothing compared to what you pay for certainly any kind of actual breed from a breeder.
Yeah, exactly. Now, we don't know what he is. So, I got
He's
one of
definitely
those.
got some boxer in him. You can tell by the markings.
Yeah,
Probably
well,
some spaniel.
yeah, I don't know, but I did get an Embark DNA test, and I swabbed his cheek yesterday and put it in the mail. Fortunately, Embark, which is reputed to be the most reliable of the doggy DNA tests because they have such a huge breed database, they're here in San Diego. So they'll get it on Tuesday when mail gets delivered, and then it's about a 3-week wait, and we'll get to see exactly what his constituents are genetically, because right now nobody knows. They had him down as a shepherd mix. Okay, but I asked him about that, and they were like, "Look, if he has a pointy nose, we just put shepherd mix." we have no idea. He was bought in as a stray on August the 2nd at 4.5, 5 months old. So yeah, we have no idea what he is. So hopefully we'll learn that in due course.
Oh,
So,
he's a very cute dog.
yeah, he's very cute. He's very confident. He's very loving. He looks up to us for approval and attention. So we are going through the training. Happily enough, already housebroken.
Oh, that's a bonus.
Yeah, big bonus getting a 6-month-old because he's housebroken. So he goes outside to do his business.
Do you still have cats?
No, we had one cat that I got back in 2001, and she
Yeah.
died back in 2021. So she was 20 years old.
Right.
So we've been pretty good, by the way, about keeping animals alive. We had a 20-year-old cat. We had a 14-year-old. Well, we had two almost 14-year-old Connie Corsos before one.
I was going to say
died.
that, and they don't have. That's
It's beyond their expected lifespan.
it's beyond their typical life expectancy. Yeah.
Yeah, so we've had pretty good luck with long-lived boys, and he's walking around my feet now, just getting some reassurance that I'm not leaving him alone. So
You heard
anyway,
you talking about.
he must have. So now he's walked back into the den. He's happy. He got his reassurance. All right, well, let's talk about the week.
Reassurance.
Yeah. I could use some reassurance right now, honestly. Watching just the fascinating thing that I have noticed over the past week. Kamala Harris did her interview where she had, Tim Waltz there because, she's a poor girl. She can't be expected to do an interview all by herself.
I love the description of him as the emotional support governor.
Yeah. Watching the way the news covered that and watching the difference between the J.D. Vance interview that the same interviewer on CNN conducted and how
both Dana Bash.
Yeah, and how unremittingly hostile that Dana Bash was to him. And then looking at just the softballs that Kamala Harris got tossed in what turned out to be, in screen time at least, an 18-minute interview. So forget an hour delving into what she believes because we got none of that.
Yeah.
We got nothing but softballs and platitudes out of that interview, and Dana Bash was perfectly happy to allow the interview to go that way.
And do
And
we know anything more about Kamala Harris's position now than we did before?
no,
I don't.
not a bit of it. And another incident of this type happened today that I want to look at. Tim Walz is at the Minnesota State Fair, having himself a good old time. And somebody wanted to ask him a question because obviously one of the hostages in Gaza, who is an American citizen, was murdered by Hamas. And so while he's there enjoying himself at the fair, and he sort of stopped to take a couple of questions, this is what happened.
How are you feeling? What's your reaction to the 6 hostages being found dead in Gaza?
All right. Thanks, everybody.
There we go. That's his reaction. Yeah, thanks, everybody. And he just walks off. Now, fortunately, AP News was there to cover this story. And so AP News gives us the hard-hitting facts that we need to know about Tim Walz at the Minnesota State Fair. Apparently, he had a pork chop on a stick, which is super important for all of us to know in terms of him running for vice president. And this is the best state fair. I can say that having tried pork chops in Iowa. Well, everyone knows about Iowa's shitty pork chops. So we are getting right there into the heart of the news of Tim Walz. And the entire week, in fact, the entire last couple of months, has been a level of propagandization that even I find hard to believe. We are being gaslit so hard, and propaganda works.
Well, that's the shame of it, is that it does work. And it works especially in a controlled information environment, which is why Democrats get and socialists and, the world over get very sweaty when information is allowed to flow freely. It has the ability to dampen their narrative, and that's what they don't want. What they want is a consistent message that cannot be assailed because they've censored all those who would assail it.
And there's been another incident about that this week, because on the 26th, I guess, on the anniversary of the Abbey Gate bombing during the withdrawal of Afghanistan, in which 13 U.S. service members got killed, they had a memorial to which they invited President Trump, President Biden, and Vice President Harris. President Trump is the only one who showed up. The story about what happened there is unclear. Apparently, the families asked him to take pictures, and someone at the cemetery didn't like it. We hear that there was some sort of kerfluffle around this. And of course, it's just Donald Trump being an asshole. That was what all the news stories were. And then Kamala Harris came out with this tweet, and I meant to pull it up.
This is probably one of the dumbest things ever done, but yeah, please pull it up.
And all she had to do is keep her mouth shut.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to figure out where that statement was.
She could have let her media sycophants carry the ball,
Yeah,
and she wouldn't have had to do anything.
Yeah, I'm not actually seeing it here, and I meant to find it. And I know if I really wanted to look at it, I
can give you a brief synopsis if you can't find it.
Basically what she said is in Twitter, and again, I can't find it, but it was something like, and there are several accounts of hers. There's the Kamala
There's
HQ,
Kamala HQ. There's
Kamala
Kamala
Harris.
Harris, and then there's Harris Waltz campaign.
But I want to find it because I actually want to show this post, and I completely forgot to do it during the.
Might be easier to find by looking up the responses to it.
Yeah, most likely. In any event, she talked about how much she respects our service members and how much, she cares about them and whatnot, and how much Donald Trump doesn't because he's such an asshole. Okay, fine. If that's the game we're going to play, well, the Gold Star families decided that they would all release statements. And so here are a whole bunch of videos. And I want to point this one out basically because of the response that it's gotten. But all of these videos are of a piece about Kamala Harris and her statement. So when she made that statement, what we ended up getting were some statements like this. This is only a minute and a half, but this fella pulls no punches.
Vice President Harris, my name is Jim McCollum. I am the Gold Star father of United States Marine Corps Lance Corporal Riley McCollum, killed in Afghanistan, August 26, 2021. Your recent remarks related to Trump's visit to Arlington are filled with nothing but lies and deceit. How do you sleep at night knowing it was you, this administration, you and Biden, you being the last one in the room, are responsible for the death of our 13 kids? You have failed for 3 years and 8 months to acknowledge our kids, to acknowledge me. You don't know me. You've never spoken to me. You've never reached out to me. You have failed in your duties as vice president. You have been nothing but disrespectful to me and the families of the 13. Yet you're claiming that you will always be respectful and show respect for our fallen. You've been absent for 3 years and 8 months. You've proven that you're not capable to do the job that you have, let alone the job that you seek. You know nothing about honor, courage, commitment, respect, but President Trump does. President Trump has been there for us. He's been a rock for us. He showed compassion for us, and he showed he truly cares for the families that truly do know what the ultimate sacrifice really is. You have the day you deserve.
So
yeah, that's super powerful.
Yeah,
especially because he just gets right to the crux. There's no, hemming and hawing. There's no throat clearing. It's straight to the fact that, and let's, reiterate here that Biden and Harris were also invited to this wreath laying. They didn't show up.
Yeah,
They didn't show up for a reason.
Yeah, Trump was there at the explicit invitation of these families.
Yes.
And he showed up.
And then he did what they asked.
And then it turned into this kerfluffle.
And it was a kerfluffle only because Trump was going to go. The fact that Mike McCall and the Speaker of the House had to get involved in clearing this is absolutely ridiculous. These are American heroes. They stood their ground at Abbey Gate despite the monstrous elements against them. And they suffered the ultimate sacrifice on behalf of us and our protectorates. That they're not celebrated by the very people who put them in that position it's just absolutely disgusting.
NBC put out an article that said, these videos, Kamala Harris did show up at the dignified reception ceremony at Dover Air Force Base. She has honored these troops.
That's bullshit.
Yeah, they had to come out with a retraction. Oh, we mistakenly said that Kamala Harris was there. The president was there, but not the vice president.
Checking his watch the whole time.
Oh, that was just a mistake. You just mistakenly said she was there when she clearly wasn't. In any event, these families have, whether they meant to or not, kind of put themselves in the crosshairs, because here's the New York Times: Trump campaign uses statement from Gold Star families to attack Harris.
Oh my God. They are just, it's not so much that they're predictable, it's that they have no shame. Zero shame. This is just full on propaganda.
Yeah, and so
I mean,
Stephen,
even North Korean, media is saying, guys, you got to tone it down a little bit. Like, you can't be this obvious.
well, Stephen Miller, posted this from the New York Times and said these families are going to be accused of being racist before this is over.
Yeah,
And
that's exactly right.
And Will Collier replied, already happening. And here you see this guy, and the video that we saw. This guy's a typical racist Trump supporter. Nothing more.
Yep.
Okay.
Because when you have nothing, you fall back on ad hominem.
Yeah, well, I'm old enough to remember when Gold Star families deserved all the respect for their pain and suffering, and they had a free pass on whatever it was that they wanted to say. Today, not so much. It's the level of Trump derangement syndrome is so powerful, and the news media is so propagandized against Trump. I don't even know how you'd fix it at this point. I mean, I don't know how you fix media.
You let them fail. That would be number one. Second of all, it's not even Trump. Look, it wouldn't have mattered if this was Romney or Bush or McCain. They play the same playbook every single time. Trump is just willing to fight back. That's the biggest difference. He fights back, and he fights hard. And that just drives them absolutely crazy. And it sends them into these moral tizzies as if they understood morality in the least. They do not. They have not a moral sense of a rock. They are simply about power, and that's it. And they see a threat to their power, to their uniparty power. That's all they see. That's all they care about, and that's why they attack the way they do. And they is not just the Democrats; it's the media, it's the entrenched politicians in Washington, D.C. It's all of them.
Well, there is a New York Post story that is showing up here that I want to show. And you talk about it being about power, and it sounds like you're being kind of an idiot or a moron about this, or that you're imparting to them motives. But anything that stands in the way of their power is a problem. And so you get think pieces like this in the New York Times. One of the biggest threats to America's politics might be the country's founding document. The Constitution threatens tyrants and despots.
Yes.
Those are the only people that it threatens. And so
actually, it doesn't threaten anybody. All it does is create
disempower
safeguards.
them.
Right. It denies power in certain places. It's not a threat to anybody.
But it is a hindrance.
Well, that's the point of it. It was supposed to be a hindrance. That was literally the entire point of the Constitution.
And that hindrance is something that we just can't live with. We can't
Woodrow Wilson complained about the exact same things. Yeah. Talk about a tyrant. Woodrow Wilson was dead set against the Constitution and tried his best to work his way around it. Complained about it constantly. How it was getting in his way to do what needed to be done for the progressive movement. What it did was constrain the not necessarily majority, but those in power uh, from running roughshod, and only barely. I mean, we still have the alien. Well, the Alien Sedition Acts was
The Espionage Act.
the Espionage Act. Thank you. And people were thrown in jail for that stuff. Uh, Woodrow Wilson abused the power of the presidency more so than anybody. Um, Even Joe Biden, who has abused it quite uh, often, Woodrow Wilson was absolutely ridiculous with how he abused it. And whenever I hear whenever I hear politicians complain about the Constitution or lefties, I know that it's doing its job. Was it not Chris Lewis? Chris Hayes is complaining that the Electoral College is a suicide pact. Oh, really? It's kept us going for 230 some odd years. It's a suicide pact. That doesn't make any sense, bro.
Yeah. By the way, just a couple of asides about Wilson. At least Wilson wasn't a commie. He was certainly authoritarian.
Yes.
And his idea was that technocrats should run everything. The centerpiece of the progressive movement was not really socialism, it was technocratism. That experts.
It was a dirigist system where experts ran everything.
Yeah, and we should all just let the experts run thing because, and a lot of this is this 19th century idea of progress that kind of percolated through the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, that we were on this road to never ending progress, and that, we would never step back, and that the world had become so complicated that our old governing systems just needed to be run by experts. And if we would just let the experts do what they wanted to do, it would make a better life for everybody. Now, I think that's an enormously stupid idea, but it's understandable in that cultural milieu that happened at the Victorian age, moving into the Gilded Age, where Woodrow Wilson, definitely a Gilded Age president. But, I always think about Woodrow Wilson, and we talk about how trustworthy the government used to be and blah, blah, blah. But you brought up the Espionage Act. I would go back just a year earlier, maybe a year and a half earlier. When he was running for his second term in the 1916 election, his primary campaign slogan was, "He kept us out of the war."
Only to immediately get us in, yeah.
Yes, he was inaugurated for his second term on March 5th, 1917. And a month later, we were at war with Germany.
Yep.
He kept us out of the war just until he got elected. Then he did what he wanted to do anyway, but didn't feel that he was capable of doing until he was in his second term.
Well, this is why, I think Aldous Huxley is probably the most prescient of all the dystopian novelists of the time. Brave New World, I think, laid it out pretty fucking well. Soma, the drug that everybody takes to keep them copacetic. I mean, how many people are on Ritalin and Adderall and Lexapro and, Prozac and whatever else to keep us docile? I think he did the best at predicting how the world would actually unfold. And Woodrow Wilson was very much in line with what Aldous Huxley was talking about.
Yeah, there is a fellow named Rudyard Lynch. He runs a YouTube channel called What If Alt Hist that has started to blow up. And this, just yesterday, he was on the Chris Williamson podcast. I don't know if you know who Chris Williamson is, but he has a pretty popular podcast worldwide. He invited Rudyard Lynch on, and he asked him
You
what
mean bigger than ours?
Yeah.
Come on, that can't be real.
As I look at our 8 views so far on today's podcast, but he had an interesting thing, and I do kind of want
a strong tether
it,
between the two.
But
It's my turn to rank the movie.
Oh shoot! Well,
A strong tether between the two.
We're hearing it, but I just wanted to try, and I just wanted to try to get what his prediction was, and I think it may be.
I'm really glad that was coming for your end, and I wasn't being talked to by some ghost through my machine.
Yeah, no, that is me. But in any event, well, I'll share it. I'm not going to go through and try to find the exact thing where he said it, but we can look at the screen. He's a young guy, but he seems to have had a very interesting education. And he's now saying that he's expecting a civil war or revolution here in the United States in the next 1 to 5 years.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah, welcome to the club. I can remember 20 years ago when we were talking about this, and Oscar, who's the big lefty guy? Oliver something.
Oliver from Media Matters?
Yeah, from Media Matters, wrote a big post about how this talk of civil war was stupid. We would never do that. And
Right.
there'd never be any secessionist movements or anything like that. We are on the cusp of a crisis that is probably, will be in retrospect, the biggest crisis in American history.
Well, it'll be the end of American history, at least as the United States of America. But yes, I mean, and at this point, I don't see how that's unavoidable. Trump, no Trump, I don't think it matters. I've been saying now for I don't know how long that regardless of the results in November, we're going to have a schism, a bad schism, because neither side will accept the results of the election. And I say that with, grave concern, but I don't see a way out of that. We're not a country that is unitable at this point, I don't think.
Earlier this week, after this interview with Kamala Harris with Dana Bash, one of the big lefties, I forget who it was, I'm not even going to try to look it up, but one of the big lefties said, I can't believe that CNN allowed such a horrible anti-Kamala interviewer like Dana Bash to handle this interview. She was clearly there to try to destroy Kamala Harris. And someone wrote back a fascinating response as a reply to that post. We don't even share the same set of facts.
Mm-hmm.
This was a softball interview. If you think this was an attempt by CNN to destroy Kamala Harris, then we don't share the same set of facts. If we don't share the same set of facts, how will we share the same country?
Right.
And we increasingly don't share the same set of facts. We've talked about this for years. We don't even have the same vocabulary. Forget the facts. We already know that people have their own factual things that are built up. We don't even share the same language. The words that we say in our discussions with our friends on the left don't mean the same thing that they mean to us. You can't even use simple terms like rights and have them mean the same thing to the left, because they have a conception,
which is something that is the foundation of our nation, rights and protecting rights.
Yeah,
we have not even a closely similar definition.
No, I mean, when you talk to somebody on the left and you talk about rights, they invariably fall back to rights are the privileges that are granted to you by the government.
Right.
And we can all determine what rights we should have.
How much does it grind you every time somebody says, the Constitution gives me this right? No, it Doesn't.
Yeah, the Constitution, our entire society is founded on, and we've had philosophical discussions about this in the past, as to whether natural rights actually exist or not. And I think we both came to the conclusion that even if they don't, it's a useful fiction to pretend that they do. But our conception of rights, at least at the founding, was that rights are inherent in the individual. You have them simply because they are a fundamental part of human nature. And our founders went so far as to say that we believe that men are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. You don't have to believe in a creator to believe, however, that human rights...
As a human being, you have certain rights to your own life, your own liberty, and your own pursuit of happiness. I mean, it's not a great leap to take, that just because of your existence that you have these natural rights. You don't need to throw religion in there. You don't need to throw a creator in there. You can accept it just based on observation of all life everywhere. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with defending your life. There's nothing wrong with trying to secure your position.
And the key point to the traditional American concept of rights is that they are inalienable, which means that no government has the lawful authority to remove those rights from you. Certainly,
it actually means that you can't even give them away.
Yeah, they are yours. They are inherent in you, and they are immune from government power, or at least they should be, and they are immune from democratic audit. And that we will support those rights irrespective of any social costs that they might have. And so the right to not testify against yourself. I'm quite sure that many criminals have walked scot-free because they didn't testify against themselves. Okay, that's something we just have to live with. And
yeah,
people get hurt if you say unpleasant things, or you force them. You don't force anybody to do anything. Conversations are all consensual. And so if someone hears what you say and they don't like it and they're upset, you can't just say, well, you can't say that. We will use the power of the state to prevent you from saying it because what you said is harmful. It's not harmful. It causes no harm at all. It may cause you personally some distress, or it may cause some people some distress. That's not the responsibility of the speaker. You're responsible for your own responses to whatever you hear, and I can't force you to listen to me.
There's no guarantee that you will not be sad, that you will not be offended, that you will not disagree. There's literally, that is not how life works. As a matter of fact, if you live your life without having ever experienced any kind of disagreement or uncomfortability or embarrassment or whatever, you're not living life. You're cocooned. You are the least venturous person on the planet. And if you want to stay that way, that's fine, but that is not incumbent upon me or anybody else for you to remain that way. Now, I'll be polite. I won't intrude on you, but I have no moral or legal compunction to control what I think or say based on your frailties. I don't care.
Well, it goes even further than that, because the whole idea behind censorship, I ran into this week, where it was on the Brazil, as you may know, has banned X, formerly
the Marina,
Twitter, because of that Supreme Court judge. So he's banned X in the entire country, and he says anyone who tries to access X in Brazil via a VPN can get fined up to $9,000 a day. So we're just not going to let X operate. And
you saw what happened as a result of that, right?
I don't know specifically what you're referring to, but
people around the globe have set their VPNs to Brazil just to let them do that. But
I was talking to some person, and in fact, he happened to be in Brazil, and he was saying, this is great. He needs to abide by our law because speech can be hurtful. And I responded to him saying, yeah, that's not how speech works. And he came back with saying, some people commit suicide because of speech, Dale.
Okay.
Yeah, not my problem. That's a tragedy, but it's not the responsibility of the speaker. And he came back and said, my God, you have no soul. No, that's not how this works.
You did have red hair at one point, right?
Yeah. The speech is voluntary. I can't force you to listen to my speech. You can tune me out. You can refuse to listen. You can block me on X so you never see anything I ever say. You are not forced to listen to things that you don't like. But because you may hear something that you don't like, you think you are perfectly justified in invoking the power of the state to impose force on people whose opinions you don't want to hear to prevent them from speaking. So basically, you want to ensure that the state jumps in to ensure that you never have a consensual interaction with someone that disturbs you. I just can't understand, A, why you would think that would be a good idea, and B, why you think that would not come back around to hurt you ultimately.
Yeah, well, obviously there's not a lot of thought put into that, into that position. But you're absolutely right. I mean, in order to think and in order to advance knowledge, you have to risk being offensive. I don't see any other way around it. We have to challenge the shibboleths, or we're stuck with them forever. We never progress. But isn't that the point of progressives, is to keep moving forward? Well, we can't do that.
The problem with progressives, as they are now, not the
they're liars,
not the 20th century progressives, is that they have a specific idea of where to progress to, and once they have reached it, progress needs to stop.
Right. Yeah, it's the utopian mentality that we get to this point, and then, you know who else thinks that? Are the radical Muslims. They think that progress stopped in the 14th century. And some of them even think in the 7th century or 8th century. How does that help anybody? I have never heard a cogent explanation of that.
Yeah, utopianism is all for progress until you reach whatever their particular idea of utopia is, and then no other change can ever be allowed.
Right.
It's going to be that utopia whether you like it or not, and you're going to have to live with it forever. Which is why it invariably devolves into a police state.
It has to. Because you can't get people to voluntarily do it. You have to force them to. Which is what has always amazed me about these totalitarian ideologies, is if your ideas are so great and they're so popular and they're so good for everybody, why do you have to force people to do them?
Ideas so good that the government has to force them on you.
Right. It's if people aren't, it's kind of like when socialists complain about wreckers and hoarders, ruining their economy and screwing things. It's like, if your system is so fucking weak that you can't withstand some people doing something slightly different, you don't have a formidable system. Capitalist system can handle that just fine because we have free floating prices. We'll handle it just fine. Yours gets completely ruined, and now you have to tell everybody what to do and be authoritarian. Yeah, that seems like a really weak and chaotic system.
You can run a system And this is the thing that bothers me and why we talk about the media and propagandization so much. You can run a more or less totalitarian-ish system without a lot of violence, as long as you can control what people hear and what they see, and you can not report on things that I think it was David Burge, the humorist, he had a blog and now he's on
Iowa
social
Hawk,
media,
yeah.
Iowa Hawk, who said, the purpose of the press is to cover stories that make the Democrats look bad with a pillow until they stop moving. And so you can actually run, especially in a country that is as politically divided as we are, you can actually kind of run a propaganda op that at least gives you an advantage on gaining and holding on to the levers of power. For example, this is what and this is a national poll, so it doesn't mean anything, I get it, but this is what the national polling looks like since Kamala Harris became the nominee. She gets nothing but fawning coverage from the press. There are no difficult questions about fracking or gun control or anything else. Indeed, she has made no statements. She has no policies on her website. It's all basically, feel-good stuff about what a wonderful person she is and, oh, we need your money. And no one is reporting in the press on what her positions are, although that could largely be because no one knows what her positions are, because we've gotten no direct statement from either her or Tim Walz about what the Trump-Harris economic plan is, except for the couple of things that she stole from Donald Trump, like the tax on wages.
No taxes on tips, yeah.
And as we pointed out a couple of weeks ago, just look at the difference in coverage between the no tax on tips from CBS News, the same policy.
That was actually pretty hilarious.
Yeah, Trump proposes it, and well, this is why it's not going to work. Kamala proposes
$250 billion over 10 years are going to be wiped out of the budget.
Yeah, and then Kamala proposes it, and it's like, she's jumping in on the side of working people.
What a hero for the working class. It's just like, are you fucking kidding me? Oh my God, you do not hate the media enough. You think you do, but you do not hate them enough.
And the number of people who still trust the media, and it's weird. You see all of these things where, 8 polls where 18% of people say they trust the media. And you would think, okay, well, great. The media should know and course correct. They don't. Because in the real world, it's not 18% of people who trust the media. It's probably about half of the people accept what the media says as truth. Because, they wouldn't just lie to us about stuff. And if you repeat the same, it's the Joseph Goebbels' big lie theory. Repeat the big lie enough and everyone will start to believe it. Well, you know what? It's true. And we are getting the big lie. And the number of people who don't realize the media lies to you on a daily basis. The government lies to you on a daily basis. And when we do find out that they've lied, it's 3, 4, 5 years in the future when the damage has been done. The COVID, did it come from the Wuhan Institute of Virology? There is an excellent colorable case to be made that it did. But for a year and a half, just asking that question made you a kooky conspiracy theorist.
Oh, look at the Hunter Biden laptop.
Yeah. This has
it's only been in the last year that they finally admitted, oh yeah, no, that was real. Yeah,
it's his laptop. The iCloud backup is the same as what he's got on his laptop. No files have been added. It's his, and it's accurate in terms of the documentation that he placed on it. But 50 former intelligence chiefs came out and assured us that this had all the earmarks of Russian disinformation.
And not one of them has faced any consequence.
We were told by, and COVID is such a great example because the lies were so thick and deep. Hey, these vaccinations will prevent you from catching COVID. And they said that at a time when they knew there had been no testing about stopping transmission. There was no way they could have stated that as a fact. Or Anthony Fauci. Well, you don't need to wear a mask. No, just don't worry about that. Those masks aren't going to do anything.
Actually, maybe you should wear 3 masks.
Yeah. And then in an interview, he just came back and they asked him, why did you say not to wear a mask? Well, we just needed to ensure that medical personnel had it.
Right. We didn't want to screw up the supply of masks to our medical personnel.
Yeah. In other words, I lied to you, thinking that you needed a mask. Now, whether masks are effective, there's been a lot of evidence since then.
No, they are not. We've had so many studies on this.
Yeah, but at the time, masks seemed like a reasonable response, and he knew that it was a reasonable response, and he did think you needed a mask, and he lied to you and told you he didn't, so you wouldn't go buy one. So if masks were protective, what he basically said is you don't need a mask, and if you catch COVID and you die, not a big deal. It's important that the first responders have masks, not that you have masks, you useless prole.
Right. We don't care if you die. We need these people to be protected. I mean, that's the way the government always does everything.
And, people talk about, and this is another thing that gets me. We can go back, as I did on my personal website last year. We can go back to the Vietnam War. The people who were running the Vietnam War, which David Halberstam in his book After the Fact labeled the best and the brightest. They had all of the charts and all of the graphs and all of the metrics to tell us how the war was going. And it was all a bunch of BS. Every time, in my lifetime, so going back to the 60s, pretty much every time we put the experts in charge of anything other than the Apollo program, it's turned out to be a disaster. Certainly in terms of public policy, certainly in terms of social policy. It was led by wishful thinking. It was led by ideology. We were assured by the experts that this is how things would work, and they didn't work that way. We've had at this point, we've had 3-4 generations of people who have watched the government fail and be wrong, if not actively dishonest, at least being wrong. And now the left wonders, why are the Trump people so anti-intellectual?
Well, and that's the thing is, what makes them intellectual? The fact that they have these degrees?
Yeah, yes, that's
the
it.
Fact that
it's credentialism.
It's
not expertise. It's credentialism.
Look, I've got big degrees. You've got big degrees. That doesn't make me an intellectual. It doesn't make you an intellectual. And I don't think we've ever claimed to be. We're just questioning and observing. I mean, that's literally our raison d'etre on this stuff. We don't claim any expertise, but we can call it how we see it. And frankly, I think between you, me, and Bruce, and even John back in the day, we've done a pretty good job of getting closer to the truth than all these experts and intellectuals have done, because we're paying attention to reality and we have some skepticism. And I think that's really the key.
Yeah,
it's
it's
to have that skepticism.
Well, it's not just the skepticism. It's to recognize when people are dealing with reality as it is rather than reality as they wish it to be.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And so much of the credentialed community have such strong ideological biases that they can't get around it. And by the way, they are incensed when you point this out. Again, Peter Boghossian, who no longer has a university job because he faked a bunch of social science papers sent them to peer-reviewed
to prove
journals,
a point.
and they all got accepted.
Yes.
In fact,
he proved to be right, and yet they were mad at him for exposing the fraud than they were about the fact that the fraud existed.
Yeah, Peter Boghossian has several videos about this, and one of them, which I think is hilarious, they had done this thing about sexual identity in dogs after they were...
The dog park. Yeah, I remember the dog park paper.
Yeah, and that got accepted. However, one of the reviewers asked a question, and he just wanted to ensure that the dog's privacy was being respected when their genitals were exposed for the spaying and neutering. And all of this stuff was just a bunch of, buzzwords and catchphrases that are popular in the social sciences. No problem getting those things published. And of course, the embarrassment when he came out and said, okay, well, that was all a bunch of BS. None of that ever happened. And none of these papers actually mean anything. It's just all a bunch of catchphrases. And of course, that was an academic scandal. He fraudulently published papers. He can't be allowed to be a professor anymore because of his fraud. But wait a second. He was exposing the fraud that social science has turned into.
Right. Shouldn't that make him like king of the professors? I mean, that's where I would think it would go.
But we have our ideological...
And then Robin DiAngelo this week got exposed as possibly, and I haven't looked hugely into it, but it wouldn't surprise me that she plagiarized her entire or most of her PhD thesis. And that would include all the things that she put in White Fragility. As she passed these off as her ideas. And what's even more hilarious is that she apparently stole them from people of color.
Yeah, well, here's the Guardian story.
She's the white woman she's looking for.
Yeah, she's the author of White Fragility. She has made a living for years now going around and doing DEI
Excuse me
stuff.
for a moment. I'll be right back. I can hear you.
But she was doing a whole bunch of DEI stuff. She's done a lot of consulting, and now they're taking a look at her doctoral thesis, and it appears that, well, she basically stole part of her thesis. And obviously she says that this is not true, that it didn't happen. She was summarizing things. I don't know. I haven't read her thesis, and I haven't compared her passages to the passages in her thesis to others. But yeah, well, that opens up another problem, which is that accusations of plagiarism have become far more common in the last couple of years. There seems to have been a period from the 80s to the early 2000s when you could write a thesis and you could apparently engage in fairly substantial plagiarism in that thesis and get away with it because it was so hard to find if you had, misquoted someone or plagiarized someone. And one of the things that the internet has done is make all these papers searchable on SSRN. And so now you can find some suspiciously similar passages in doctoral theses that are, and this is the thing that gets me. Citation is super easy. I mean, it's built into Microsoft Word. You can put in citations almost instantly in Microsoft Word. And by the way, citing other authors' work and then saying whether or not you support their conclusions and why, it's perfectly acceptable. Why plagiarize your thesis when
Yeah, I've
simply
never understood that.
simply quoting the study that you're citing is a perfectly acceptable part of writing your thesis.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Unless you don't have anything to add. You're
Yeah.
passing these ideas off as your own because you have nothing beyond that already settled conclusion.
Yes, that's the problem. Your PhD thesis is supposed to add
To the
body of knowledge. You are adding
Right.
new and previously unexplored research to the body of scientific knowledge. If you have nothing to add, then I guess finding someone else's old PhD thesis and claiming their ideas as your own is one way to get through your oral challenge to your thesis. But sure, this credentialism is a cancer.
Yes.
There was one thing about 100 years ago, prior to World War II. There was one thing about a college degree was that it actually did mean something. You were presumed to be pretty well educated if you had managed to go to college and graduate.
And there were far fewer colleges at the time, too.
Yeah, and far, far fewer people managed to complete college. You were generally assumed pretty well educated if you had a high school diploma. You'd made it all the way.
Right.
And of course, that was a time when a lot of people just didn't make it all the way through high school. You know, the number of people who had a 6th or 7th or 8th grade education in the 1930s and 1940s was they were literate and they were able to, live their lives in normal society, but their education was limited. People who went to college were well above in terms of their schooling.
They were exposed to a lot more arts and philosophy and theories of, whatever that, aren't necessary to do a job.
And what we have done since the 1940s is we have turned colleges into vo-tech schools.
Yep.
Where for the most part, you will take a course of study that will teach you the specific things that are relevant to your course of study. So if you're a business major, the chances of you ever having to take physics or chemistry or something like that are infinitesimally small unless you choose them as an elective. Sure, they say you've got to take a science elective. So
you've got to have your 4 credits or 8 credits or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, but other than that, everything else it's not a liberal education in the way that a college student would have recognized in, say, 1930, where you will, by God, learn Latin and maybe Greek, and you will read Virgil in the original Latin and
Homer.
And you will also take physics and chemistry, and you will also take
physics such
art,
as it was. But
yeah, physics such as it. Well, I mean, again, post-Einstein, so it was something.
It was still Newtonian physics. I mean,
well, after 1905, that certainly changed a lot once Einstein proposed the
I bet
special
not for
and
the
then
basic,
general relativity.
Physics 101.
Yeah, but you also had to take art classes and
right.
music theory and all of these other classes to give you a well-rounded education. We've kind of walled that all off into these silos now, where, if you're not in a music program, why would you ever need to take music theory or the history of music or the history of art? What would be the point?
Yeah, I may be one of the last ones, or at least my generation, who I graduated with a liberal arts degree. Now, I had a major in European history, but I had a liberal arts degree. I studied literally everything from business and economics to chemistry, physics, and obviously a lot of history and English, film history. I had a little bit of everything. I had a really well-rounded education, and that was deemed good back in the 80s. because you emerged as somebody who could take a lot of information and assimilate it and put it into some sort of, you know, approachable system or explanation that would help move the ball forward for whatever organization you're with. There was nothing that I needed to know that was terribly specific, unless you were like a business major, and you're going eventually towards maybe an MBA, but at least into, say, loan servicing or a bank job or something. It was going to be a little bit more important to be in finance, but you could get away with just being a smart person, having a well-rounded education, and you could qualify for all kinds of jobs. And that's changed over the last 30 years.
Yeah, and we've gotten ourselves into this position where credentialism is so important. We don't really care if you have an education. We don't really care if you know anything. What we care about is if you have that degree. And I remember, in high school in the late 70s and early 80s, and I graduated in 82 from high school. And the idea back then was, if you get a college degree, over your lifetime, your earnings will be much, much higher than...
It was true at the time.
Yeah. And it was true at the time. And it's interesting just to open up a site like Glassdoor or Monster.com or whatever. And, entry level, sales management trainee, $30,000 a year. And then you look, a degree in sales, marketing, business management is required.
Right.
I mean, these were jobs that were open to just regular people 50 years ago.
What the fuck do you need to know about sales management in order to get into sales? Either you can sell something or you can't. I mean, it's really that easy.
It's funny, as the government has moved into guaranteeing student loans, the idea has magically arisen that everybody needs to go to college.
And what does that do? It's the same thing as anything else. When you dilute by, it's just like pouring a bunch of money into the economy. It weakens the dollar. Well, if you pour a bunch of people into education, well, it weakens the degree that you're getting. Because, I got one of those.
And by the way, you can
college education degree. Yeah.
You can also trace the number of actual professors at a university, vice the number of administrative personnel.
Oh man, yeah.
And along with that, trace the rise in college tuition over the last 40 years.
Which, there was a point where, I think it was like 20 years ago, all of a sudden the entire federal government took over student loans and also how colleges got paid.
Yeah. I mean, not that any of this matters, because it could very well be that 10 years from now, the only way that you'll be able to get an education is if you enter a monastery in a religious order, so that you could, read hand-printed books by candlelight. Because I'm desperately afraid that that's where we're heading. I mean...
Yeah, what did the socialists have for light before candlelight?
Electricity. Yeah. Or what did we use for light before socialism? Electricity.
Right.
Yeah, it's things are getting so crazy now, and they're getting bad in a way that so many people are going to be shocked if after this election everything devolves into either communism, depending on who wins, or regional warlords.
Yeah, you're right. And look, we've been talking about this, and I guarantee you we're going to continue to talk about it up till election day, is regardless of who wins, how acceptable is that going to be to the people who lose. And it doesn't matter if Trump wins or Harris wins. I don't believe that will be acceptable to the other side. And I predict that it's going to lead to a lot of trouble.
Yeah, so do I. One of the things that I think people fail to realize is the enormous amount of power people have in their hands, average people have in their hands, just to say, no, I'm not going to comply anymore. And how helpless even the most brutal police states are whenever people just say no.
Well, that's why they try to control speech, is so that those people cannot form coalitions.
That's right. Because if you think you're isolated and you're the only one who thinks this, then it becomes a lot harder for you to stand up and say, no, I'm not going to do that. And
the Soviet Union, the Nazi regime, the fascist regime in Italy, they were famous for this, that they squelched any kind of helpful rhetoric in order to get people to think that if you're against this, you're really not with the majority of people. You're an outlier. And God help you if you speak up.
Yeah, and the only way that you can make that work is to ensure that speech is stifled to the point where there can't be a discussion on those issues.
Right. The internet screws that up, which is why they go after places like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever.
Yeah, I firmly believe that the reason why the revolution in Romania happened in 1989 was because Nicolae Ceausescu, who'd run the country like his own personal dog kennel for the past 40 years, that one day he got up and he made a speech and a bunch of people in the crowd started to boo. And then everybody started to boo. And it was like there was this massive realization, I'm not alone. Nobody else wants this to happen either. Everybody else thinks this guy is a buffoon. You know what we should do? We should go grab him and shoot him, which they did in 48 hours.
Yeah.
How do you go from having a police state where everybody is terrified to say or do anything wrong unless they can do it secretly inside the privacy of their own home, to all of a sudden saying, no. In fact, why don't we just drag you into a courtyard and shoot you and your bitch wife as well? And that's exactly what they did. And it was that one day, that one speech where everybody just started to say boo. And once people started booing him, the feeling of liberation must have been so immense. Everybody agrees with, nobody wants to live like this. This has been...
and then they hadn't been able to talk about it. They hadn't been able to confer with others, except in secret. And how many people could you actually trust?
Yeah, because you had this vast network of people who would inform on you. And that's the society we're headed to whenever you have major political figures who start talking about things like, oh, we need to ban hate speech. And we need to silence people for disinformation and misinformation.
This is why I think America can never be overcome by that sort of thing, because there are just far too many of us who will not succumb, period. We will continue to speak out. We will continue to talk. We will continue to confer with others.
Sure, and the way to do that...
We're not going to be cowed.
Sure, and the way to do that is to silence your organs of dissemination.
Right.
So your social media decides to censor you. I mean, again, Facebook is a great example of this. Try going on to Facebook and saying anything controversial, or try posting certain links to certain websites. You just can't do it. They are just banned. And if you can prevent people from talking, like if you look at YouTube's new terms of service, and by the way, we still have a warning on our channel for me literally reading from a federal court opinion, which was a violation of YouTube's terms of service. If they can prevent you, that's the thing. The way to do it is just to prevent people from speaking. Sure, you can go onto social media and post things about your cats and your dogs and your family and stuff. That's perfectly acceptable. Talk about, they were banning people on, again, going back to COVID, they were banning people on Facebook for talking about the lab leak theory. That is disinformation. And so you can't get a message out. And of course, that's the way to do it, is to say, oh yes, we believe in free speech, but then ensure that anything controversial, you can't say it on that platform. But again, that's a private company. They don't have to allow you to say anything that they don't want you to say. So where do you go? What is your platform to get any sort of message out? Well, they just make it impossible for you to do that in any popular forum, so that, again, you feel isolated, you feel alone, you can't say what you think. You can think what you want, but you just can't say what the government doesn't want you to say. And there's no government, no company really that can be trusted with that. That's one of the reasons why, and look, I don't know if he's a good guy or not, but one of the services that Elon Musk has provided is tearing down the old censorship regime at X. And you can hear a lot of stuff on X that you just couldn't hear before. Now, I'm seeing a lot of white supremacist stuff on X now. I'm seing a lot of more racist stuff.
Are you?
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't been on him forever.
I'm seeing racist stuff. I mean, explicitly racist. All you have to do is search X for the term sub-Saharan. And wow, will you get an eyeful. And that's unpleasant, and I dislike it.
Well, it is unpleasant, but who cares? Here's the thing. I remember back when I was with, before I joined Q&O, and I was still a secondhand conjecture, and we had some, I can't remember what the website is, but it was some neo-Nazi website. They had some commenter who would come on, and we would play with him like killer whales with a baby seal. It was just like, oh, really? Oh, so this is what you think?
Yeah, I think he was
sure about that?
Yeah, I think he was some Stormfront asshole.
Stormfront, that's it, yeah. And it was like, dude, go ahead. Say whatever the fuck you want to say. You are going to be so pounded that by the end of the time that we're done with you, you'll slink away. And, you'll slink away and say you then declare victory, but I don't really give a shit. You will have gained no foothold. You will have converted nobody, and you will have convinced no one. So go ahead, please state your piece. Be openly, hostily racist. I want you to identify yourself. I want you to tell me who you actually are.
Yes, it's convenient.
That's fantastic.
It's convenient when the enemies of freedom self-identify.
Mm-hmm. I have no problem with that.
And by the way,
the ones who pretend that they aren't, and pretend that they're somehow progenitors of freedom and freedom of speech, who lie to me through their fucking teeth. Those are the ones I fucking hate.
Well, here's the trouble with censorship, is that what it does is it drives dissent underground.
Right.
Where it kind of festers. And
builds.
It's much easier to identify the enemies of freedom when they can say what they want to say.
Right.
Because then you can
wear
argue
your
with
sign.
them. Then
wear your fucking sign, dude.
Yeah, then you can address their arguments. Then you can come up with rebuttals. Oh, and by the way, you know who they are. Mm-hmm. Because they've self-identified. And I
have much more respect for somebody who will come out to me as openly racist than to somebody who pretends that they're not, but somehow hold all these views that are really racist. You know?
Yeah,
I'd much prefer you to just be honest with me.
and it's the same way with the communists or whatever. And by the way, we have not done a superb job in this country historically of respecting the free speech rights of certain people. Communists,
That's true.
For example. I mean, the entire Red Scare of the 1950s, whether you think that we should or should not have been afraid of the Reds, the fact is, the Hollywood blacklist, all of the, forcing people to name their fellow communists. We kind of went overboard on that. This, the land of the free, home of the brave, because it was so dangerous to us that somebody might have communist leanings and they might say commie-style things or write movies with socialist messages. You know what?
Well, it was a bit more complicated than that, but
yes, because
I'm not disagreeing.
Because the American Communist Party was under the direct command of Joseph Stalin. So
yes,
let's be sure that
there was some issue for concern there. Did we go overboard? I would agree.
Yes, I mean, going after the Stalin connection was okay.
Oh yeah, so somehow all those people who are on the blacklist managed to make tons of money making movies while they were blacklisted. I mean, look up Sedona, Arizona.
Yeah, well, there was a lot of writing under assumed names.
Right.
There are a lot of pseudonyms during the blacklist period.
Yeah, so that's not to excuse the government overreach. No, because it was government overreach.
But restricting freedom of speech. Anyone who says we need to restrict your freedom of speech historically has never been the good guy.
Right. Yeah. Period. You don't even have to say anything after that. That's exactly right.
That is self-evident from history, and the number of people in this country that jump in full on, well, there's certain things you shouldn't say. Yeah, you shouldn't be able to say hateful things about, minorities or immigrants or anything else like that, because that's just harmful and hurtful. You shouldn't be allowed to say things that aren't true. By the way, not whether or not you believe them to be true, but whether I think they are factually true. And it's such a short step, and we already have seen it happen in some of the censorship that's happened over the past 4 years, where we now take opinions and judge them by whether or not they're factually true. Well, you know what? Opinions are just that. They're opinions. They're personal views. You may hold them. They may be factually true. They may not be. We may not be able to determine the factual truth of them.
Well, opinions,
but the opinions themselves are too dangerous.
To do with fact.
Yeah, but the opinions themselves are too dangerous to be expressed.
Right. Well, and this is a global phenomenon, as well, we've been noting for years. And it's something that it's, well, like I said, it's global. It's not exclusive to the United States, but it tends to find the greatest resistance here because we have the First Amendment. And that is something that the left is very, very keen to overturn. Just like all this talk about hate speech, they've been trying this for years. Well, that should be an exception. Well, no, it's not. And that's just stupid. When you look at what, the First Amendment jurisprudence. But in all the other countries, including in the Anglosphere, which has the strongest tradition of First Amendment or free speech protections, you don't have that anymore in the UK. You don't have that in Australia or New Zealand.
No, expressing certain opinions are now crimes.
There was a guy in the UK that was arrested and sentenced to 2 years in jail for waving a British flag. what the fuck are you doing?
But you don't seem to understand. He was waving it in a particularly insightful manner. And the environment in which he was waving it was improper for the expression of that, because it could have caused violence.
I hope Lord Bolingbroke is rolling over and spinning in his grave like a freaking machine lathe, because that is not at all what the law intended, ever.
We've built, the problem is we've built a society of such mental fragility that an increasing number of people simply cannot tolerate hearing. I would
call this the feminization of politics, but okay, go ahead.
People cannot tolerate hearing things they don't want to hear.
Yep.
And even if the things that you tell them are factual, they hate it. Hence the term hate facts.
Right. What a fuck. I hilariously self-immolating term. Hate fact?
Yeah, that's a hate fact.
It's a fact. You don't have to put anything in front of it. It's a fact. Is it not a fact? Prove it's not a fact.
No, but that's not the problem. The problem is not that it isn't factual. It's the problem that it is an inconvenient fact. Because
that's all it is.
Because it means that
destroys a narrative.
Yeah, what I want to believe cannot be true if this fact is true. Therefore, it is a hate fact. And I can dismiss it so that I can continue to believe what I want to believe.
If it were a fact that nobody on the census in Bethlehem was named Jesus or Mary or Joseph, would that be a hate fact towards Christians?
In the conception of some, yeah, it would be.
Right? I mean, that's a really inconvenient fact for me, right? Because I'm an actual Christian. I believe that whatever. That would put me on the spot. But how is that a hate fact? That doesn't mean that somebody hates me. It's just a fact. That's all it is. It's a fact. And it disproves what, or at least it leads towards the disproving of something I hold very dear, very dear. That would be a problem for me. But that doesn't mean that somebody tried to hurt me. It's a fact or it isn't a fact.
Unfortunately, all of the cultural institutions are perfectly happy with that philosophy being the dominant philosophy of their institution. You can hardly touch an NGO, a university, or even a government organization that doesn't, to one degree or another, fully support that concept of free speech, which is you are perfectly free to say anything you want as long as it's the right thing.
Right.
And the fact that there's not more pushback against that, I think part of it is complacency, in this country at least, because we have the First Amendment and we have tons of First Amendment jurisprudence, and we sort of rely on that possibly dangerous Constitution that we have to ensure that we can't be explicitly censored by the government, although, as we've seen, there are ways around that. But there's not enough pushback against these ideas. And who would push back? It wouldn't be the media, who are perfectly happy with this progressive BS. It wouldn't be education, that has been taken over by progressives. The NGOs, I mean, you talk about spinning in their grave like a machine lathe. What do you think Henry Ford would think about the Ford Foundation?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, look, Elon Musk certainly put his money where his mouth was worth and has explicitly tried to turn Twitter/X into a free speech forum. And then, like we talked about last week, there's Pavlov Durov, who is now in jail awaiting trial. There are people who are trying to push back against that, but they meet a lot of government hostility. And I don't think that's a government that represents what people actually want. I think that's government that represents what government wants.
Well, that's the problem. Who do governments represent? You texted me earlier this week with an interesting question.
Oh, about France, yeah.
About France. Do elections mean nothing? Well, France had an election months ago at this point. And has there been any change in national politics in France? No, they haven't even come up with a government yet. In fact, they decided
they have a government. They do have a coalition. What they don't have is Macron appointing a prime minister. Which, look, French politics and the structure of the government is completely screwy. It makes no sense to anyone. They have a president and a prime minister, which is just weird in itself. But what is supposed to happen is that the president, Macron, is supposed to appoint a prime minister from the ruling coalition. The ruling coalition is dominated by a leftist party, and they have put up one of their commie brethren as the person they want nominated. He won't do it. Now, in our exchange, you pointed out that there was a pause for the Olympics and whatever else.
Yeah, they called a 1 month truce for the Olympics.
Right. But that's well over, and Macron still won't do it, to the point that the assembly is now calling for his impeachment. And I don't even know how that works. I couldn't even imagine to guess. I don't even know how effective it would be.
There is nothing in France that could be governed by a single simple rule that they cannot introduce an inordinate amount of complexity into.
Right.
Everything, I mean, you talk about the term Byzantine, and that is French politics.
It really is. It's like designed to be almost impenetrable, except by the most erudite, parliamentarians, who are available.
It takes an degree from the École Polytechnique to even figure out how France's government works, which is why those are the only people who get government jobs. But look, Britain is no better. I mean, you had an election.
That's true. That's right.
You had an election in which they had a conservative government for 14 years, and this is the problem. This is, by the way, Trump is a symptom of this problem in the United States. But you have a conservative government for 14 years under various prime ministers in Great Britain who constantly promised to do a few simple things that they never did.
Brexit being one of them, that they still haven't finished it. It's still not done.
No. And they promised to reduce, illegal immigration and all the others, none of which they ever did.
None of that's been done.
Okay, so you figure, we have a democratic system. We'll have an election. We'll figure that out. Okay, so in the election, 30% of the electorate voted for Labor, and Labor now has 400 and some seats out of a 650 seat legislature. So Labor now has a super majority.
1/3 of the vote and 2/3 of the seats.
Exactly. And are they going to do the things that the conservative governments would never do? No, of course not. They've decided that, the people we really need to go after are the people who want immigration to be controlled and to have a controlled border. And here in this country, we have very similar problems. We have a government that always seems to do things that work out for the government, but not the things that work out for the American people. Donald Trump, for all of his faults, is not the Republican nominee because he was such a shit-hot president before. He is the
Yes.
nominee because he speaks for a bunch of people who do not believe that the policies that are promulgated by our government and the social conditions that result benefit the American people. Look at
Donald Trump would never have been in this position but for the 20, 30 years of Republicans saying one thing and then doing another when they got elected.
Yeah, we've had a dysfunctional system where we talk about young people and how lazy they are and whatever in this country, and how the Zoomers are just a bunch of snowflakes and whatever. But the Zoomers do have a point. I did all the right things. I was told I needed to go to college. I did. Now I've got $50,000 to $200,000 in debt, depending on what.
Brian
school I'm-
Kaplan wrote a book about this, right?
Yeah, and now I can't get a job that pays more than $30,000 or $45,000 a year. There's no possible way that I will ever be able to own a home, because the prices of homes are now, the median price of a home is now well above $500,000. There's no possible way that I can even qualify for a conventional mortgage. And I certainly couldn't come up with a 10 or 20% down payment. I'm going to be living in my parents' basement for basically the rest of their lives, if not the rest of mine, because I'll never be able to own a home. The opportunities for advancement are not really there for me in modern American society. I can't support a family on a single income anymore. I mean, since 1973, the average blue-collar wage for workers, when you account for inflation, has been largely stagnant, except for a couple of little bumps here and there, while the prices of everything have increased.
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, we don't want the federal government to do... Well, there's a lot of stuff we don't want the federal government to do.
I don't want them to do anything, but...
And to the extent that we have these problems, a lot of them result from federal government policies.
Yes.
But the people who want those policies, large businesses, real estate and investment companies, the big investment firms, they want these policies. Whether it's bringing in a whole bunch of immigrants to keep the price of labor down, or whatever it might be, we have a government that does not do what the American people want. And that's why we have Donald Trump. Because Donald Trump is the cry Donald Trump is a cry of the dispossessed normies who are saying this is not how things are supposed to work. And Donald Trump...
I don't disagree at all.
And Donald Trump was not super effective in his first term at turning those things around. I don't know how effective he can be in a second term at turning those things around. I can tell you that Kamala Harris will do nothing to do so.
Right.
And very few other people in government, certainly in the, I hate to use the term deep state because of the political connotations that it has, but the permanent government, the executive departments, they certainly don't want these policies to change.
Yeah, they're an entrenched class.
And by the way, my warning, if you think Donald Trump is bad, wait till you see what comes after him.
Yeah, and that's so that's been Glenn Reynolds' thing, right? Choose the form of your destructor. And Donald Trump, like you just said, Donald Trump is not, he's not a panacea. He's a symptom, or not. He's a sign of the symptom.
Yeah,
he is
the cause of anything.
No, he is what people have turned to because politicians no longer listen to their constituents, and he actually has and this is what's so weird. It's so backwards. It doesn't make any sense. This billionaire real estate guy, has a better sense of what people on the ground, doing the work, living day to day, paycheck to paycheck. He has a better understanding of what they're going through than these politicians, especially representatives in the House of Commons. Sorry, House of Representatives.
Wrong country. Wrong house. Well, the whole thing about the Affordable Care Act is, sort of a perfect microcosm of how it works, certainly on the Republican side. We need a Republican Congress to get rid of the ACA.
Oh, God.
Okay.
This whole timeline was fucking ridiculous.
Okay, you got it. Well, Obama's still president. We're going to need a president. Okay, you got it. Well, it's been here for so long, it's going to be kind of hard to unwind. So we're just not gonna, but hey, thanks for your vote. And by the way, at least as far as the far left progressive wing of the Democrat Party goes, they're no more happy with their politicians than Republicans are with theirs.
No, that's true. I mean, the uniparty complaint is not just amongst Republicans, it's also amongst Democrats. And look, they're right. I don't agree with anything that those complaining about it on the Democratic side have to say, but they're absolutely right. These people do not represent us. They represent themselves. They represent them and their friends in the donor class.
Yeah, it's a donor class government.
Yeah, it's a patrician system. It's an oligarchy.
Yeah, and immigration is another issue. Okay, whatever you think about the immigration bill that came up several months ago, the fact is that the Republicans who want to stop immigration ensured that bill wouldn't pass.
Because it wouldn't have stopped immigration.
Well, I mean, there were bad things in that bill. It did something. We would have been letting it.
We talked about this. We've been letting in over 1 million people a year.
Yeah, and what's the Republican?
Just because.
And what's the Republican alternative that passed through the House?
Well, the one that they had would have boosted the wall and returning people south of the border.
Yeah, by the way, Kamala Harris wants a wall now. Yeah, that happened this week.
Let's see.
We think she wants...
Oh, this looks good.
A friend of somebody's cousin who works in the Kamala Harris campaign says that they thought that she said she wanted a wall. And that's about as close as we can get to whatever her position is.
But her values have not changed.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody is getting...
JD Vance went after that. Has JD Vance not been a pleasant surprise? I didn't realize he could be this good at Bulldog. He's doing impressed me.
Yeah, he's doing what vice presidents are supposed to do. Although, the idea that Trump needs a bulldog is...
A bulldog, right. Yeah, it's kind of ridiculous.
It's kind of ridiculous. He bulldogs enough for...
But he's actually... What he does is he takes away the need for Trump to respond, which has served Trump well. One of the best things he did in the debate with Biden was not over talk him and let him just those were the rules, which, by the way, Kamala Harris wants to change. Yeah, isn't that awesome?
Now all of a sudden she wants to change the ABC rules because she wants to interrupt Donald Trump.
Excuse me, I'm talking.
Yeah, and then
I'm talking.
Yeah, and then when he interrupts her,
excuse me, I'm talking.
Yeah, exactly. That's how she wants to react if he tries to interrupt her.
Like that would change anything Trump did.
And if I was Trump, I'd say no.
Stop talking.
And if I was Trump, I'd just say nope. These are the rules that were agreed to.
And that's what he's done.
So
they insisted on these fucking rules. They insisted on all this shit. You hung yourself by your own petard because you're an idiot.
Yeah,
and you're not capable of doing a fucking thing that has anything to do with debating. You are stupid. You're incompetent. You're incomprehensible. And I'm going to have a field day with you.
Kamala Harris is the perfect example of the credentialed midwit.
And how credentialed is she even?
Well, she has a law degree, and she passed the California bar exam eventually.
No, she didn't. She did eventually.
Yeah. But
I passed 2 bar exams in the same 3 days.
Okay, California's bar exam is reputed to be one of the
It is
toughest.
a 3-day bar exam, but I've seen it, and trust me, it's not easy. I won't say it's easy, but it's not that hard.
It's easy enough so that a midwit can pass it the second or third time.
Obviously, because look at all the lawyers
from California. So it can't be that hard.
If you can get a driver's license, you can probably get barred in California with the right credentials.
Again, just in summation, because we're heading close.
Oh wow, we're way late.
Yeah, we're heading close to 2 hours. Donald Trump is not ultimately the answer to the problems of our government. Ultimately, the answer to the problems of our federal government is a substantial diminution of its size and power.
Yes.
I don't think people realize how many problems, economic, social, and political, in our country derive from the fact that we have, since especially the 1960s, made the federal government too large, too obtrusive, and too engaged in the daily lives of the citizenry of this country.
In which it has no business being. Richard Epstein, law professor at University of Chicago, pointed out quite cogently that if you don't give politicians power, then they have nothing to sell. So if you take away that power, they can't sell anything, and they're going to be less corrupt. That's where we need to go. That is where we always need to go.
And which, by the way, applies to all of the federal executive agencies.
Absolutely.
If you have nothing to sell, then there's no reason for companies to lobby you for whatever it is that they lobby you for.
And then the money might go towards more useful purposes. Hell, it might even go towards raises for the factory workers, the people on the line, the middle managers. Why not use that money more effectively to boost your company than lobby government for favors?
Because if the government says that they are for sale, everybody will come buying, because that's the easiest way to increase profits without actually having to come up with better products or services. We can just allow the government to run interference for us.
And drive out our competition.
And by the way, this is not new. Adam Smith in 1776 spent an entire chapter on the wealth of nations, talking about how if government is giving away favors or selling favors, businesses will line up to buy them. And, you talk about almost every inflation. There's a great one. We're $35 trillion in debt. We keep adding trillions of dollars to the debt every year. It's going to be another $2 trillion this year that we're going to add to the debt, because we're going to spend $6.5 trillion on $4.4 trillion of government revenues. We are flooding the economy with money.
Chinese money.
And the government's response, certainly the response of politicians on the left, like Elizabeth Warren, is, well, look at all this corporate greed.
Yeah.
A government that can't go $35 trillion in debt and can't spend $2 trillion a year that it doesn't have is a government where you won't have the corporate greed promoted inflation. It's not corporate greed. It's the government. The government is almost always the problem. Look,
unfortunately, there are far too few people who are versed in just basic economics. I mean, I don't know why what's his face's book, not Thomas Sowell, I think it's called Basic Economics or Slackernomics. You know, you could even introduce Slackernomics.
Yes, I have a book on
a really good basis in what we're talking about.
Yes, I've written a book on basic economics. It's called Slackernomics. It's available on Amazon.
It's a really good book, and it really does explain in plain talk. It's not hard to understand. There's no tricks there. It's just straight up verbiage, and it gives you a really good basis of understanding how not only do personal economics work, but also how national economics work. It's a great book.
Well, I appreciate that plug, and on that plug, I'm going to end it right here. So I think
you don't want me to go to my critique. That's all you want to do.
Michael, have a great week. We'll talk to you again next time.
You too, brother.
And for the rest of you, thanks for watching. You have been watching the Observations Podcast for Sunday, 1st of August, 2024. Have a great week. We hope to be able to see you again next time. Till then, so long.